No.
Okay, Representative Allred,
Here.
Representative Andrew,
Here.
Representative Berger,
Here.
Representative Brown,
Here.
Representative Costin,
Here.
Representative Lawley. Here. Representative Obermueller,
Here.
Representative Provenza. Here. Chairman Northrup.
Here. Thank you. Welcome to House Education, Chairman Scott. I understand you're going to walk us through the bill and tell us what your compadres did to the bill along the way. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senate File 51, entitled the Finance Region Cost Adjustment. The joint interim bill, the purpose of the bill was to provide some relief for particularly Teton County and North Lincoln County Star Valley School District, where the inflation, particularly the housing, is giving them extreme difficulty in retaining, recruiting professional staff, particularly teachers. And what the bill does is it goes into the regional cost adjustment and essentially puts a Band-Aid on the problem by allowing there's several ways of computing regional cost adjustment. And this adds a third one. And you can see it, really the meat of the bill is on page 4, starting line 7, where you're talking about the greater of the existing language of the 6 consecutive semi-annual reports, January fund, first and immediately preceding school year, or semi-annual index computed January 1 of this immediately preceding school year. That language gives relief to these school districts that are being hit by the very rapid inflation, relief that the rolling average does not. I do not pretend to you that it will solve all the problems. It's a Band-Aid on the problem, really intended to carry us forward until we can see the effects of some of the other efforts that the districts are making to solve their problems in terms of affordable housing, and until we can get to a general recalibration. So as you would expect, and an interim fix between recalibrations, it's not necessarily the permanent solution. It's an immediate, what we could find is an immediate Band-Aid. And there are others here that could speak better than I can to the magnitude of the problem and the extent to which this will grant relief. It will be significant relief. Mr. Chairman, the problem I had was it does affect only these 2 school districts, but it introduces potentially, if it just goes into the statute and stays there, it introduces another factor that, because you have a choice of the greater of several things, will escalate generally our school finance costs. And I had a majority that did not like that. And so I need to do something. And the classic solution, where particularly where you know your remedy that's proposed is supposed to be temporary, you put a sunset date in with point of, okay, let's fix the immediate problem, but let's look for a longer term fix in this whole area and force that with a sunset date. So you don't have vested interests that say, no, leave us the way we are. Let's get a general fix. And frankly, by sunsetting, you can't go really beyond the subdivision of the formula that we're talking about without having constitutional changing it too much problems. But the whole regional cost adjustment, which is subject to this sunset, that's a key component, and that will help us, Mr. Chairman. We've had troubles for the past 10 years getting recalibrations done. And I think having the pressure of a sunset date will help us to get a recalibration all the way done, which I think we very much need to, and goodness knows the last one was messed up quite a bit by the feds passing a major, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you weren't here at the time that happened, but the feds passed a major funding bill with strings that nobody understood, that affected a potential recalibration, made it virtually impossible for us last time. But we need to have that forcing mechanism so that we actually get a recalibration done and fight it out as to and reach a compromise on all the recalibration issues that will face us. And I think there's a great virtue in having that done. We're obliged to statutorily, and we just haven't been able to. So, Mr. Chairman, there's that factor there. But frankly, I was dealing with principled opposition that I thought commanded a majority in the committee and likely a majority on the floor without a sunset date. So we looked at the possibilities and just put in it's a classic sunset designed to force action so that the temporary fix is just temporary and we look for a permanent fix at the appropriate time, which is the recalibration. But that's the controversial element here is those things. Do we have a further escalator in the whole school finance system? And that brings opposition. Or do we force, we're going to have a look at the whole system again in this regional cost area?
Thank you, Chairman Scott. For the benefit of the public that's listening and for the new members, would you enlighten everybody to when the next recalibration will be? It will be done in schedule, I'm informed, is in 2005. We're doing them every 5 years and would take effect with the school year that is 26, 27. In other words, by putting it the sunset, if you look on page 4, line 12 in the engrossed bill, July 1, 2026 is the sunset date. So that's calculated to fit with the next recalibration. So, Chairman Scott, if the Joint Education Committee, along with the recalibration committee, does their job, then the recalibration should fix the problem of having the repealer on the bottom of the page 4.
Yeah, the recalibration, if the recalibration gets done, the repealer will disappear in that process. And that's the whole design of these things. That's the way sunset works.
Right. Any questions for Chairman Scott? Go ahead, Representative Clauston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chairman. Just being new to this committee, you know, Wyoming has gone through bust and booms in the past. Have we ever done anything like this in the past for other communities, or is this something new?
Go ahead, Chairman Scott.
Chairman, my memory fails me on the specifics, but I think the answer is yes for these communities because they've been getting them is a problem. And some of the existing law that we're amending here was designed to solve the problem for these communities that have the high cost education. And frankly, the level of inflation that they're seeing there outran the ability to solve it with the options we have already in the statute. But I think the basic design of the regional cost adjustment was to solve this problem and some other ones with the finance system.
Do you feel like you got an answer that you like? Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I will plead age and memory problems. More specifics, but yes, I think we have done this sort of thing before to solve particular problems.
Let me just say that in the model, there is a regional cost adjustment in it. And it's used primarily for these two communities and some others where the index says that they're having inflationary problems. So. Anybody else have a question for? Yes, go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Scott. I noticed that you were an aye on the bill and you had a 16-15 split. And that was in an effort to get it over. But then I look at the nays and I'm just trying to count up how many of the nays would have probably been yeses had we not put a sunset, and how many of the opposite we would have had. Would it have been a 16-15 split the opposite way without the sunset? Is that what I'm understanding?
Go ahead, Chairman Scott.
I think there was a very high probability of that. You know, until you actually take the roll, you don't really know around this place. But I think we might have lost it, and I think it might have well have been not 16. It had less than the requisite number of ayes by several more. It could have well have been 17 or 18 votes against. There was a lot of vocal opposition to the idea of putting anything in the model that would serve as an ongoing escalator, and a provision where you pick the greater of one of three different options clearly has that feature to it. And they weren't necessarily opposed to these communities. They were opposed to the escalator in the model.
Further questions for the good chairman? Anybody? All right, Representative Clausen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification. So with the sunset on there, does that remove after that all future regional cost adjustments?
Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly what it does. And that's the classic. For those of you new to the legislature, that is the classic sunset. You remove a key part of whatever you're doing. Theoretically, it started out way back when we created the management audit committee. The idea was we get rid of an entire program, maybe, but what we have found by experience over the years, and that's now 40 plus years of using these sunsets, is that the real reason you do it is you think the world is going to change, or you're doing something you know is temporary and you want a permanent fix. And putting a sunset on drives a bill through the legislature to fix it one way or another, and forces us to come to a compromise on the issue that everybody can live with. And that's the general purpose behind sunset dates. And they have become, over my period of time in the legislature, much more routine. You often have a sunset date or a quasi sunset date in a bill. And frankly, Mr. Chairman, going forward, because of the importance of getting recalibration done, I'm going to suggest, if I'm here at the time of the next recalibration, I'm going to suggest we put one in generally, just so that the recalibration in fact occurs and people can't say, well, I've got a slight advantage to not doing it, kill it that way. I think there's considerable virtue in that, particularly with the legal requirements to get it done.
So I'd just like to clear up that I did misspeak, that the regional cost adjustment is on the regional difference for the cost of personnel, not inflation. So yeah, it's in this particular case.
And it's the one that was selected here because that's where the biggest problem is, Mr. Chairman.
Correct. Further questions for the good chairman? Not appearing. You're off the hot seat for a little bit.
Okay.
We have the department come up if they'd like to comment on it. Okay,
I don't know. I don't want to touch this.
they don't want to touch it. Okay. Anybody else want to touch it? WA, come up and fill them up the seats and we'll take public comment. Please go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County, active duty in the Navy 30 years. The military faced exactly this kind of problem back in the 80s. Now, the military's always had a housing allowance, but for large cities like Washington, DC, where I was stationed, it just didn't get it. And the solution they came up with was what they called a variable housing allowance, where they did regional surveys where they were sending sailors. You know, we were sending E5, E6s to Washington, DC, and their choice was to live 30, 40 miles out of town because that's where they could find what they could afford to live in, with an attended commute that could be on the order of an hour to an hour and a half. So that way of forming up a regional cost adjustment, they called it a variable housing allowance based on region, not based on inflation, was a reasonably good solution. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Wendy? Thank you, sir, for your input.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. As this bill was originally drafted and presented, we were in full support of this bill. With the standing committee amendment, it presents a substantial problem for us. We understand that the bill, as it originally was proposed, was an attempt to resolve an issue that we are seeing in these counties, and we do need to resolve that issue. The issue of recalibration and the broader discussion about the regional cost adjustment is something that we should take up during recalibration, not held within another bill. The other concern that we have with that is we have not passed the last two recalibrations, and I understand that this is an effort to try and get folks to come to the table and come to that agreement. But we do not feel that this is the way that we go about designing that compromise. We should take care of those counties that need this adjustment and take care of the folks within that county and within those counties. So with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. If we remove the standing committee amendment from the Senate side, you would be in full support of this bill.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, that is correct.
Further questions for Mr. Mullen? Off though, thank you.
Go ahead, Brian. Come on up, Phil.
Come on up and fill up the seats is right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee,
Welcome back.
thank you. Janine Bay-Teske from Teton County. I just want to shed some light on how dire the situation is. You know, Mr. Winnie made the comment about folks being able to commute 40 miles or something like that. We really don't have that option, simply because what has happened in Teton County, Wyoming, has spread to Teton County, Idaho, and spread to Lincoln County School District number 2. So there really isn't the ability to just move someplace else and commute into Jackson in order to be able to work. Just some data points for you. Last year, this past school year, we had 61 resignations. 41 of those were certified teachers. I am not talking retirements, I am talking resignations. People cannot afford to live and are tired of it. Personally, my property taxes this past year went up 90%. That's on top of the 32% it went up the year before. And so what's happening is you get these huge escalations of property taxes, which of course are driven by sales data because the cost of housing is escalated so much. And consequently, what happens? Well, rents go up. So it becomes a vicious circle, and our staff is just doesn't know what to do. This past budget that we approved in July, the the board approved, took $2.5 million out of reserves to subsidize salaries because, you know, I think we all recognize that we are certainly in a period of hyperinflation, period. But in our neck of the woods, particularly with the housing escalation, it is like hyper on steroids. And we just, you know, we have to do something. I mean, with, like I said, 61 resignations, how long can we sustain that? So I just, you know, encourage your support and I thank you.
Janine, how many of those 41 certified positions were filled?
All of them.
That's good.
They'll come for a
What's-
year.
So I said, what's your, no, my next question is, what's your base salary now?
63, I think.
That's probably the highest in the state, right?
Oh, yes. By and
Okay.
far.
What can you afford?
Go ahead, Mr. Brown. I'm sorry, Representative Brown, Chairman Brown.
Just out of curiosity, what could one, let's say a single person with no kids, what could they afford in that community for rent? What do you expect for a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment in your community for rent?
Well, I
Right,
can
Janine.
tell you a 2-bedroom is going for about 44 to 4,800.
Month.
I can tell you, I have an 800 square foot guest house that I have never rented before until this year, that I rent to a teacher, and I'm charging $2,000.
Thank you,
Representative Berger, go ahead.
Brian.
Mr. Chairman, Janine, thanks for being here. Do you think Teton County and Lincoln too are the only counties that are going to face this, or do you see the potential of other counties maybe seeing similar increases that could really exponentially grow like what these two counties are feeling?
Go ahead,
Well,
Janine.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger, I certainly don't have a crystal ball, but I am extremely suspicious about what's going to happen like down in Kemmerer when you start bringing the power plant on and you don't have the housing to support the folks that are going to be building and working at that power plant. But, and you know, it kind of gets into the whole boom and bust thing as well as, and to address Representative Closton's comment, you know, Campbell County actually has seen some escalations depending on whether you're in the boom cycle or the bust cycle, right?
Go ahead, follow up.
Well, are there any neighboring states that have similar towns like Teton County that could, then they're starting to experience moving further away so that they can unless you want me to discuss it, but I'm asking you the question that you see potential.
I certainly
Right,
see
Denise.
it in Teton County, Idaho, which is where some of our
Yes.
teachers have lived. And the rents, they lag us a little bit, but not a whole bunch.
Not in the
Um,
southwest corner of
Representative
Wyoming.
Berger,
Oh, sorry. Sorry,
Through the
Mr.
chair.
Chairman.
there you go.
Thank you. In the southwest corner of Wyoming, near the good state with bees.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Chair, Representative Berger, I don't know that much about it, but I've heard, you know, I certainly pay attention to housing markets, and I know that the housing market in Salt Lake City was quite strong. So I would suspect that that has driven some of the same kind of issue.
Anybody else have questions for Janine?
Yeah.
Representative
and-
Austin?
And
Oh.
Mr. Chair, Representative Berger, lots of resort communities go through the same thing we do. Although I will say, take Aspen, for example. I think they certainly have a jump on us in terms of being able to provide housing that we didn't get a handle of yet. And as I testified in the Senate, I would beg to differ with Senator Scott on this being a permanent escalator. Because I really believe that as we continue to build housing, and we have in Teton County, we have about 1,025 residential units coming on stream in the next 3 years, I can see rents going down, which would drive the WCLI down. So I thank you.
Representative Austin, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, just, I guess, two questions. The first one I'm going to deal with is what's your suggestion when we have several other cities that are going through this inflation that come to us and say, hey, we need more money too because of the shortage in the housing, as we've seen everything increase throughout the state. So I feel like I'm helping two cities here, but maybe not the rest of the state. So how would you address that with the rest of the school districts?
Go ahead,
Well-
Janine.
Mr. Chair, Representative Closton, for one thing, I've been pleasantly just surprised to see that there were some bills floating around that actually did contribute to housing, not in Teton County per se, but across the state. It's a real problem. It is a huge problem. I mean, I've been told, I don't have the data offhand, but I've been told, for example, Shoshone is going through some similar issues. So I think we're just, I think we're leading the way.
And then
Follow up, go
Thank
ahead.
you, Mr. Chair. And then, you know, my next thought or word, and I want your opinion on it is, you know, the legislature hasn't got recalibration done in the last 2 times. If we get rid of regional cost adjustments and the legislature doesn't fix recalibration this next session, then we won't have any regional cost adjustments. So I get really nervous about getting rid of that, using it as a bargaining chip. But from your point of view, with that last amendment, do you see any problems with it?
Go ahead, Janine.
Mr. Chair, Representative Clouston, I do, and I think Mr. Farmer's going to address that more than I can. I will just tell you that I have been through, I guess, 05, 10, 15, 17. I've been through 5 recalibrations. My daughter, who's now 30, testified at the first one on this very issue, which I think helped to drive some of the RCA that we're seeing today. Is that, you know, she had teachers that were working 2 and 3 jobs in order to be able to afford to live. And so I just, to me, it would be a travesty to not recognize the differences, the regional differences across the state. And I think it would challenge the equitable delivery of education.
So I
Thank
know
you.
that on the other side of the park in Park County, that such, I would say, housing crisis is occurring. And there's actually the Powell boards asked the superintendent to examine townhouses and maybe a complex for just for teachers, someplace for them to live. So it's bleeding over.
Okay.
I
go
guess,
ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I may add one more thing, Representative Clouston, one of the things, we just went in November, we had $160 million SPET ballot, different items on the SPET ballot. One of those items was $16 million that was put on by the school district for employee housing, and it did indeed pass. So we will begin our first major housing unit. We presently have, we built 11 units out in Wilson. Oh goodness, when did we? 2015, I think, was the grand opening of those that are townhouses that have sold. We have 4 units right now on the end of one of our elementary school properties that are employee housing. And I think we've got a couple more of our modulars that are going to be moved there. And basically what we did was we had some modulars that we had to move in to accommodate the student population at our elementary schools. And we moved those to one end of the property and have turned them into rental units for our employees. So we're trying to nibble away at it, but it's expensive to do.
Representative Lawley, you had a comment?
Thank you for being here, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Janine. I really hear you on the issue of how dire it is, and but what do we say to other districts, smaller districts that face challenges in different areas and have been affected by the legislature's failure to recalibrate? Like, what do we say to them? This seems like a carve out in a way, and I'm not even saying I'm not inclined to do something about it, but, and maybe you can help me a little bit too along that line of educate me a little bit about how the calibration works. When legislature fails to recalibrate, we just move it to the next step of time when they look at it again. There's no interim process if there's a failure. Tell me about that.
Well,
Go ahead, Janine.
Mr. Chair, Representative Lawley. So what is recalibration? Recalibration is taking, I believe it's what, 38 line items, Brian, within the block grant model? And going through those 38 line items and trying to align the resources to the needs of school across the state. I guess I would need to have a specific example of a problem another district had that, I mean, I could certainly think, for example, down in Kemmerer that, you know, they've had, or better yet, Rock Springs, where they've had a difficult time in attracting teachers. I do believe, and I thank you all for approving the ECA that's coming forward. That to me is one of the critical things that needs to happen on a regular basis so school districts can actually budget appropriately and to be able to support our teachers and our staff. Saying that, if you remember, Representative Brown, the last couple of times, we did not address the salary issue as we addressed an ECA. So, I mean, this is just a step beyond, in my mind, the ECA.
Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I live in a community near a really big resort with a lot of famous people there. And their workers are starting to spread out as well, and they're coming into our community. And I get what you're saying about your community and Lincoln too. We're facing those same issues. We're at the beginning of this. This RCA helps two districts. We want to be equitable. We want in the fair play as well. What do you say to that community in the southwest corner of the state that's trying to stop this and help, you know, because we have young teachers that are brand new from the University of Wyoming, trying very hard to find housing and cannot do that right now. My own daughter in particular. Okay. I don't want to go back home and say, we gave Teton and Lincoln everything. I don't know if I can do that. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Berger. I totally respect what you're saying because we're having similar issues here, but what's nice about this bill is it does not call out the two communities, right? Okay. What this does is it creates a mechanism that if you are over a certain threshold, your community then qualifies for a regional cost adjustment. No. So what will end up happening is if your community, based on the language that we have here and what the interim work was done, you have the greater of these two different indexes. And whatever that index that you hit, whatever the greater is of that, you're going to get the regional cost adjustment. If you don't qualify for that, if you don't hit that threshold, you're not going to get anything extra. But you're not going to lose anybody. No. So while it impacts two districts right now, there is the chance that this could be an issue. And I think that Senator Scott even mentioned it. That's why he'd like to see this generally inside the model and have an understanding of what we're doing, because as it stands right now, this becomes political warfare.
Thank you, Representative Brown. Mr. Chair, may I? So Representative Berger, I suspect, I don't know for fact, but I have a strong feeling that you are on the hedonic index. And what happens is, as Representative Brown explained, is they lay it out, and whichever index provides your district with the highest amount, that is the indice that is applied to your district. And if indeed housing becomes a major issue in your district, I strongly suspect that you will move from the hedonic index onto the Wyoming cost of living index, which is what this addresses. It does not address two districts. It addresses those districts that are on the Wyoming cost of living index. And at one point in time, there were 5 of us. I'm not 5 districts that were on that index. I don't know how many there are on it now because I think Converse County fell off. But that is indeed how the system works. I know the 2 sublet districts, Teton, Lincoln too, actually used to be a hedonic index until just recently.
All right, we'll take Janine off the hot seat for the bill. Thank you, Janine. Mr. Farmer, please introduce yourself and.
Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Trying not to plow ground that's already been plowed. Want to remind folks again what we're talking about here, and I appreciate Representative Brown bringing this up. So in recalibration, you set out the model, and the model are kind of the pieces of how a formula works. So the formula is in place every 5 years. Annually, there is a calculation for external cost adjustment, which is inflation, and then regional cost adjustment, which has to do with those factors that make one community more expensive to live in than another. So those calculations happen annually. This one looks at the calculation for the Wyoming Cost of Living Index. Right now, in that annual calculation, it takes 6 data points. 6 data points. So basically the 6 semi-annual WCLI data points and says that's the data that we use to calculate what the cost of living is using the WCLI. This one says, so normally that's kind of this gentle slope up. This one says when we have a spike, when the most immediate one preceding is a spike, rather than the gentle slope up, we're going to recognize that spike, and we're going to use that one data point as the basis for the WCLI calculation instead of the calculation over time. So Mr. Wilmarth, LSO's staff who works on school finance, did a wonderful memo for the committee dated November 1st. And in Mr. Wilmarth's memo that he shared with the interim committee, he laid out some of the details that I want to share with you. 100 on the WCLI means statewide average. So 100 is statewide average. What happened in Lincoln 2 is they went from, excuse me while I find this again, they went from 104 to 107. They went from 104 to 107, so they went up 3 percentage points basically. And that was so significant to them that it resulted in $650,000. $650,000 to that community because of that spike. That's how fast the cost of housing is going up in that particular district. Now, any other district that had the same experience would benefit from this the same. So if you had this immediate spike in the cost of housing in your district and the WCLI offered you a better calculation than the Hedonic did, then you would benefit from that calculation. What happened in Teton County is that they went from 164 to 165. I mean, that's crazy. 100 is average. They're 165. So they went to 165, and that increase cost $200,000. So if we're talking about escalators, the only escalator here is $850,000. Now, if we want to know the greatest escalator in school finance right now, we just approved 3 charter schools that cost $14 million. So it can't be that this is just about some escalator. This is a minor escalator, $850,000 compared to the other escalators that we've recently approved. So this is a minor escalator that addresses an immediate spike in data. One district currently at $650,000, one district currently at $200,000. So as we go through that experience, any other community whose data comes up the same would have the same benefit. So any community whose cost of living index has that kind of increase would have the potential of benefit. So this is the legislature saying, we don't have a perfect instrument for regional cost adjustment, but we recognize that some communities are having very immediate impact, and we're willing to provide that relief for those communities that are having very steep, very immediate impact. Now, Mr. Chairman, the concern that I really have with this as it stands before you now is that it has this sunset that takes away the whole of the RCA, not just this one little calculation and data points. Now, if there was a concern that we needed to sunset this particular calculation instead of our traditional 6 data points that we might look at a one spike, then potentially we could sunset just that one provision. But what happens if you sunset the entire regional cost adjustment? You leave the legislature without such a measure. You're hoping that the legislature will fix it, but you leave the legislature without a fix. And that is to the detriment of the state of Wyoming to be on a hope. We can fix it later. We can go through this and fix it later, but not to leave the state of Wyoming on a hope that we will fix it someday. That would be unconstitutional. To not have a regional cost adjustment would put the state in the violation of the Campbell cases. The court was abundantly clear. We must have a regional cost adjustment in our formula somehow, some way. So to leave the legislature with nothing leaves the state in a very tenuous position. If we need to have a sunset, we can sunset this calculation, but not the whole of the RCA. That is not good policy. Mr. Chairman, we would support some other measure, but what is before you right now is problematic.
Thank you. Questions for Brian? I think everybody got the questions. Thank you, Brian. Anybody else would like to address? Please do, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for this time. We've been dealing with this prior to COVID. We could see things start to creep up. COVID hit and it changed rapidly. As the letter that you received noted, our average home sale in North Lincoln County was $740,000 this past year. Having put 4 decades into that place, I've never seen anything like this. And we are in a situation where I don't think it's going to be changing. We're not a resort community, nor do we want to be a resort community. We just simply want to be Wyoming. And it's all changed around us rather quickly. It's not just our schools and our situation there with our employees. I serve on a member-owned board for a member-owned co-op that serves North Lincoln County and Teton County. We pay our people very well. But we're going to start, we've reached out and we purchased land in Teton County to start building housing, unheard of for the first time, building housing for our employees. We've reached out to other state agencies, those over our highways, those over our game and our fish. We've reached out to them and said, would you like to team up? One of them has already showed an interest because they have the same exact situation, not making enough to live in that part of the state anymore. And for the first time in our board meetings, we're broaching the subject of doing the same thing in North Lincoln County that we're doing in Teton County, considering housing for employees. Pay very well. The cost of everything has gone up to a point that I would have never expected. People are getting creative. They're living on mom and dad's place and building something nearby. My son lived in our basement for a few years while he built his own house because you can't go out and afford to build one anymore. So we're being creative. We're trying to save ourselves. We're trying to be self-reliant about this. But as far as our schools go now, this is a small approach to helping this area and eventually an area where you live too. I might submit that the love is headed your way and things are going to change rapidly. And we got something here that helps a little bit, puts a threshold in place and opens up doors of opportunity. Simply asking for your help for our educators in this case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions is a good senator. Former president, go ahead. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Dockstader, what is your thoughts on the sunset provision? And I think some compelling arguments have been made about how that affects obligations that we have, under the lawsuits and things that what is your position on that?
Yeah. Go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, if that makes it acceptable for everybody, fine, I would suggest that the state is nimble enough that we can adjust. And I think the next time around, as we make some of these adjustments, that it'll be a different picture than it was in recent years. Because too many people are feeling it in too many different places. The energy sector out in the east, it's rapidly changing. They're not making any more Wyomings. A lot of people are wanting to come and share it with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further questions? Anybody? Thank you. President
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dockender.
Thank you, committee.
You certainly may. Any more public comment? Anybody else? Welcome back.
Mr. Chair, Representative Closton, I can't help but keep thinking of your question. And it finally occurred to me. This bill, the process that's being defined in this bill mirrors the process that we use for ADM calculations. So when generally your ADM is calculated on a 3-year rolling average. If you have a spike in your ADM, you get the spike. So it's exactly the same process as what we're talking about there. Instead of using a 3-year average for the WCLI, you would receive the spike. Well, thank you.
Any questions for Janine? Thanks, Janine. Anybody else? Any further public comment? None appearing, will proceed to close. Nobody online? Certainly, you may ask him. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Senator, Chairman Scott, when was the last time that, I believe it's called the hedonics index? When was the last time that was recalibrated? I'm thinking around 2005-ish.
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The last time it was put in is 2005. I understand that people have we've calculated it since then, but putting it in would hurt certain school districts. And so there was opposition to doing it. But that's hearsay, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know that for a fact. So I want to be very clear about that. But it has not been formally updated since 2005. And that has obvious problems.
Representative Lawley would like to also ask you another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Scott, I know, you were talking about some political calculations and how we got this repealer, and I'm fully aware of that, but it does concern me. What would your view be on those calculations politically of if we were to amend and as someone referenced a moment ago, tie it really to this particular change that's being made and not the entire regional cost adjustment?
Senator, I'm sorry, Chairman Scott.
That would help, but I don't know that would get me to 16 votes in the Senate. And that's the pure politics of it. There is a broader concern, and a broader concern with our inability to get recalibration done. And, nobody's trying to get rid of the regional cost adjustment. But we think that it's a crucial thing, and that would force a bill to actually come and get compromised. And people would have to put aside some of the petty, my district is slightly benefited if we don't kind of considerations that are proving to be a real political problem. So that's, and frankly, my recommendation, if I'm in the legislature, and I may or may not be at the time of the next recalibration, and one of your representatives, the oldest members. So, but my recommendation would be that recalibration bill ought to carry a general sunset date to force the next recalibration occurring, so that we can't have the problems that we've had in the past few years. Now, the feds mess it up the way they did last time, with a bunch of maintenance of equity, maintenance of effort requirements that frankly we did not understand, that affects the whole finance system. Then you have to do something different, but that's a special case.
This time we'll close public comment. If you'd like to stay there, Senator, you certainly may. Chairman.
We've got to get back to the Senate.
Yeah, it's 1:20. Thank you. Okay, committee, you heard the comments. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move the bill.
Second.
Moved by Brown, seconded by Provenza. Okay, as we walk through the bill, Anything on page one, anybody like to talk about or amend?
Mr. Chairman, I'm just gonna make the amendment. I'm not gonna go on page one.
Thank you.
I'm gonna move that we remove, I'm just gonna do this and then I'll wait for a second. Lines 11 and 12 on page 4. Starting with this subdivision is and continuing on to line 12, repealed July 1st, 2026, strike all.
Second.
Then moving second to strike on page 4, line 11, this subdivision is on line 12, repealed July 1, 2026. Discussion,
Mr. Chairman,
sir, go ahead, Representative Brown.
I've only been here for 7 years, but I have been here not enough time to know that this is not going to force the hand on the legislature to do a damn thing when it comes to recalibration. I understand where the senator was coming from to at least get this over to us, and I appreciate getting that over to us. I've taken a look at the vote. I'm looking at the people who voted against it. I'm looking at the people who voted for it. I think we gain more than we lose by putting this back over there and allowing for concurrence. This is an obligation that is required by us. We've set it out there. I see absolutely no reason why we would need to have a repealer on here. And not only that, this was, in my opinion, I think this was done with the intent of trying to get rid of this completely. And I think that it's falsified, because if you sit there and you think about Gillette, I know they were underneath an RCA at one point as well. And that RCA has been removed because they don't have the boom. So, you know, the fact that this is an automatic escalator, I don't buy it. And I don't think we need to be having this discussion about repealing and trying to fight for this again.
Further comments?
I'm new.
Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm new here. But tell me, what if that doesn't prevail in conference? I mean, how does that leave this these districts that are at most at risk here if we end up with nothing that comes out? I'm really asking. I don't know. But that is a risk, right?
Yes, it is. Representative Brown, would you like to elaborate on that?
Not really. But thanks.
All right. Go ahead, Representative Berger.
I just want to thank everyone for their comments, and where I'm trying to get at that like the good senator said from Lincoln County, it's going to start happening in my county, and they're coming. And I know there's others, but I know where it's happening, and we need to be obligated to them. And I don't want to get rid of the RCA and CA. Yes, and I concur with what the good Representative Brown said. So thank you for your comments, Representative Brown.
I would just comment about the RCA that it was part of the Campbell decision. And so if we get rid of the RCA, we'll be back in trouble again. Yeah. So go ahead, Representative Boston.
I'm just going to give a little history lesson here. So they're called the Campbell cases because that's the first one in the alphabet. So a lot of people think Campbell County was always bringing it on, but if we could have Albany or Bighorn start it, then they'd be called a different name. So.
Are you taking offense to the Campbell?
Hey, Mr. Chairman, UNA was in that case as well. They were right there during the.
All right, any more comments on the amendment? None appearing, will proceed to vote. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, it's passed. Oh, we're already 3, 4, 5, 8-1. Well, we got one more amendment. I'm here.
No, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm just looking at the changes, and I'm just trying to make sure that that's really the only change. I mean, there was a pretty significant change in the standing committee amendment as it came out of the Senate committee. And I'm just trying to read through, it's page 2, lines 13 through 23 on the original. Page 2, lines. And then, Mr. Chairman, what I'm doing is I'm just trying to make sure that we're not removing just the sunset date, and we're not looking at something else that was done over on the Senate side that I don't think there was any malice intent behind this. I just want to make sure that we're doing. Looks to me like it's pretty much the same, but maybe maybe our good senator over here that's still sitting with us might be able to enlighten us on whether that was the only change that he can remember.
Senator Docksetter, would you like to address that?
The only significant change and ultimately, Mr. Chairman, and Representative, we were trying to make sure that we got it through process, and that's what we're trying to be careful about. That's where we're at.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. You have more comment? Would certainly may. Come on.
Hop on the mic, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When this amendment was brought forward, there were two other options that were also brought forward. And I have a copy of those two options. If you wanted to sunset this particular portion of it, that's what these other two options do.
Mr. Chairman. I'm not looking for anything else, Mr. Chairman. What I'm looking for is a standing committee amendment. Deleted page 1, line 4 and entered providing a sunset date, but then page 2, lines 13 through 23 were deleted entirely. And then new language was reinserted and it looks like it's almost identical, but then page 3 is deleted completely from the original bill. And so I'm just in the process of trying to track those changes to make sure, as I look at the bill as it was engrossed over to us, the only major issue that I see there was the sunset date. So I think that's all I think. And if there is anything else, I'll bring a committee of the whole amendment to fix it.
All right, me, there is also an amendment that I have brought that's on your seat, on your place. This is to shoehorn in ADM. And to take it from 80%, which it is now, down to 75%. The problem is that there's school districts out there that are on a block schedule. If you're on a block schedule, you have 4 blocks during that period. So if you pull off one section of that and it'd be for like a senior where he's got a day or a section out, or whether they're go to seminary or whatever the case may be, 3 of those make 75%. And at that point, then that district is being penalized at the 80%. And so they've done a lot of workarounds to get around that. One of them is you just take 10 minutes off each one of these and make a 5 period. But what you do is you reduce the English and you reduce the math time by 10 minutes approximately each, depending upon the district. And in that, thus doing, you reduce the amount of educational time for those students in that. And so this fix would put that, allow the districts to make that block back into a 4-layer block instead of a 5-layer block.
This especially goes, Mr. Chairman, goes with the apprentice type program when they start doing work release and those seniors, not just for seminary, but also the work release program as well.
That's another place. Go ahead, Representative Obermehl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious if the chairman thinks that this fits into the bill. I mean,
We would have to allow LSO to change conforming language, which will also be part of the title.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, to Representative Obermueller's question, so in committee, you can change the title of the bill. You can change the entire intent of the bill. That's why we do substitute bills a lot in committee, is you have free reign, but once it hits committee of the whole is when you can't change the title of the bill.
follow up, Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead.
And I think my point is made. I mean, this thing, just a different subject in my view. I don't think we should consider it.
As I said, it's part of the school finance. So, and ADM is part of the school finance, and that's my reasoning for bringing it. So
Did you move it?
I did not move it, but I will move the amendment. Okay, we got a move and seconded. Any more discussion? Not appearing, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The noes will, let's start over. Ayes, please raise your hands. Okay. And the noes now have to raise their hands.
I don't want
All right, 7-2. That motion has been adopted. Anything else, anybody? All right, Diana, please call a roll on it.
Hey, Representative Allred.
Aye.
Representative Andrew,
Aye.
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Costin, Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye.
That's 9 ayes do pass with amendments.
Right. Thank you, committee. Don't forget, Friday morning at 7 o'clock, we have education of education, so. In our usual. Can you get a calendar invite? Oh, yes, you will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.